The night was supposed to end with champagne and laughter, until it didn't. A single dad, Ethan Miller, found himself behind the wheel, driving his powerful CEO boss home after she had one glass too many. But what she whispered in the dark car, a truth no one was ever meant to hear, would change not only his life, but his daughter's future forever. Stay with us, because what happens the next morning is something you won't forget. And if stories of family, second chances, and shocking twists touch your heart, go ahead and hit subscribe. That way you'll never miss the next one. The marble floors of the Harrington Grand Hotel gleamed under chandeliers, each crystal catching light like fragments of a fractured star. Laughter and champagne bubbled through the air as executives congratulated themselves on another quarter of staggering profits. Ethan Miller stood quietly near the back, a man out of place in this glittering world. His black jacket, borrowed from the company's supply closet, fit awkwardly across his broad shoulders. He wasn't an executive, not even close. He was a single dad filling in as a part-time driver and logistics assistant. One more job on a growing list of night shifts and overtime hours to keep his 10-year-old daughter Sophie clothed, fed, and dreaming. Ethan's eyes scanned the room the way men who had lived through hard years often did, attentive, steady, aware. The crowd parted subtly around Clara Harrington, the woman everyone else orbited like a sun. She was the CEO, young for her power, striking in her scarlet silk gown, her reputation whispered about with awe and fear. People said she built empires and burned bridges in the same breath. Tonight, though, her laugh rang a shade too loud, her steps a little too unsteady. Glass after glass had been pressed into her hand, and she had accepted each one as though daring anyone to stop her. When the party finally thinned near midnight, a hush fell over the remaining staff. Clara leaned against a marble pillar, cheeks flushed, eyes slightly glassy. Her driver had long since been dismissed, and her closest aides had made excuses to vanish. The silence of avoidance was louder than the music that had faded. Ethan hesitated, then stepped forward. "Ms. Harrington," he said, his voice low, respectful, but firm. "Let me drive you home." For a heartbeat, she regarded him, not as the nameless employee she normally ignored, but as if trying to focus on a figure out of place. Then she gave a faint, tired nod. The city glistened with rain as Ethan pulled the company sedan into the empty streets. Clara slumped against the passenger seat, her mask of control slipping in the shadows. She murmured fragments that startled him, about her father's absence, about how silence echoed even in penthouses high above the skyline, about how power didn't warm a bed at night. Ethan kept his hands steady on the wheel, eyes on the storm-lashed road, but each word lodged in him. He had seen men in his neighborhood broken by loneliness, but hearing it from someone untouchable like Clara Harrington unsettled him. They turned a corner only to find the main boulevard flooded by a sudden storm. Traffic snarled, horns blaring, taillights smeared red against the rain. Ethan made a quick decision, pulling onto a side road that climbed toward the older part of the city. The tires hissed through puddles until the sedan shuddered, forced to halt by a fallen branch sprawled across the narrow lane. With no way forward, they were left stranded beneath sheets of rain. Clara stirred, pressing a hand to her forehead. In the dim light, her carefully crafted facade looked almost fragile. She shifted, and in a moment that startled Ethan, she reached across the console and lightly gripped his hand. Her voice, softened by exhaustion and wine, carried words that made his breath catch. I wish someone would see me. Not the CEO, just me." The weight of that confession pressed against Ethan's chest long after her head tilted back against the seat, her breathing deepening into sleep. He glanced at her, then at the road ahead, the rain drumming like a relentless heartbeat on the windshield. Sophie would be waiting at home, curled in bed with the lamp still glowing. And yet here he was, caught between obligation and compassion, carrying a stranger who wasn't a stranger anymore. When he finally steered them toward his modest apartment after the storm eased, it wasn't ambition that guided him. nor duty. It was the echo of those words, fragile and human, that refused to let him drop her off into silence. Morning sunlight filtered weakly through the blinds of Ethan's small apartment, casting pale stripes across the worn hardwood floor. The city was just beginning to stir outside, car horns and vendors calling through the streets. But inside the two-bedroom flat, a hush lingered. Clara Harrington woke slowly, head heavy, her silk gown creased from the night before. For a moment, she didn't recognize where she was. The faint scent of coffee and laundry detergent far removed from the sterile polish of her penthouse. Her eyes roamed over the modest living room. The patched sofa, a table crowded with Sophie's crayons, and the framed photographs of a smiling child with dark curls. It felt like stepping into another world, one where warmth replaced glass and marble. She sat up, uneasy, when her gaze fell on the wall opposite. Taped haphazardly in uneven rows were children's drawings. Bright suns, crooked stick figures, clumsy hearts. Most featured a man and a girl holding hands, and beside them, sometimes faintly penciled, sometimes colored with care, stood a woman, a mother. Yet Clara knew from the hushed conversations she had overheard at the office that Ethan's wife had died years ago. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. She pressed a hand to one of the sketches, tracing the outline of a mother drawn from memory or longing. From the kitchen came a quiet clatter. Ethan, already dressed in his work shirt, was packing Sophie's lunchbox, the smell of toast drifting out. Sophie herself padded into the room barefoot, rubbing her eyes, her curls in a tangle. "Daddy?" she asked softly, then noticed the stranger on the couch. Clara, uncharacteristically self-conscious, managed a small smile. Sophie tilted her head with frank curiosity, unafraid. Children had a way of cutting through facades that adults built so carefully. "Are you the lady from Daddy's work?" she asked. Clara nodded, suddenly feeling more vulnerable than in any boardroom. Ethan set a plate of toast on the table, his movements steady, though a faint embarrassment shadowed his face. "I'm sorry, Ms. Harrington. The storm made it impossible to drive last night, so I brought you here. I didn't want to leave you alone in the car." His words were practical, but the weight in his voice hinted at the unusual intimacy of the situation. Clara should have been angry, should have been alarmed at finding herself in the home of a subordinate, but instead she felt something else. Disarmed. Sophie tugged at Clara's sleeve, holding up a crayon drawing. "This is my mom. She's in heaven now, but I still draw her so Daddy doesn't feel lonely." Clara blinked, her breath catching. The innocence of the statement cut through her. She had spent her life armoring herself against pity, against exposure. But here was a child unafraid of loss, carrying it like a fact of life and still finding a way to soften her father's pain. Clara's chest ached in a way she hadn't let herself feel in years. The memory of the night before flickered, the rain hammering down, her hand on Ethan's. Her own voice, blurred by exhaustion and wine, whispering, "I wish someone would see me, not the CEO." She had forgotten, but now it returned sharp and undeniable. For the first time in a long while she wished she hadn't spoken, wished she hadn't revealed that crack in her armor. Yet when her eyes met Ethan's across the small kitchen, he wasn't smirking, wasn't exploiting her weakness. He was simply watching with a quiet steadiness, as though seeing her as she truly was. She reached for the mug of coffee he set before her, her hand trembling slightly. Words rose in her throat before she could stop them. "Thank you," she said softly. Not the clipped, formal thanks she gave board members or investors, but something raw. For last night, for not leaving me there. Her voice faltered, and she hated how it did, but she forced herself to finish. "I don't remember the last time someone just looked after me without wanting anything in return." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. Sophie's humming filled the gap as she colored another picture at the table, and Ethan gave a small nod. For him, it was natural, doing what was right, not what was convenient. For Clara, The weight of her words startled her. She realized she had never said them, not even to people she had trusted once. Later, when Sophie ran off to put on her shoes for school, Clara found herself lingering at the door. She should have left with brisk efficiency, reasserted her distance, yet she paused. Something about this small home, about the drawings on the wall and the simple breakfast table, felt more grounding than all the glass towers of her empire. When Ethan finally spoke, "Drive safe today, Ms. Harrington." She almost wished he had said her first name. As she stepped into the morning light, one truth pressed into her with quiet force. Those words she had spoken in weakness had not fallen into a void. They had been heard, and for reasons she couldn't yet name, that terrified her even as it lit something faint and warm inside. Clara Harrington was not a woman who repeated mistakes, or so she had always told herself. But in the days following that storm-soaked night, she found reasons, thin, implausible reasons, to cross paths with Ethan Miller again. At first it was practical, asking him to retrieve an obscure file from the archives, or to handle a delivery she claimed required discretion. Yet beneath the veneer of efficiency was a restlessness she couldn't name. Each time she saw him in the office corridors, sleeves rolled up, moving with quiet purpose, she felt the echo of that morning in his apartment, the drawings on the wall, Sophie's innocent voice, her own words trembling out in gratitude. Ethan noticed, of course. He was no fool. He could tell the CEO of Harrington Global didn't usually fetch her own reports from the logistics floor or linger long enough to ask after his daughter's school play. Yet he played along, answering her questions with calm professionalism. Sophie, however, was quicker to dismantle the distance. When Clara visited under the pretense of returning a misplaced binder, the girl darted into the living room and pressed a new crayon picture into her hands. In it, the little family trio was drawn again. Sophie, her father, and a smiling woman beside them. Sophie beamed. "That's you," she said with simple conviction. Clara froze, her throat tight, while Ethan murmured a gentle correction. But the damage, or perhaps the healing, was already done. That night, Clara sat in her penthouse staring at the skyline. She had built her empire on discipline, never allowing herself to be distracted by sentiment. Yet the child's drawing lingered like a hand pressed against her heart. The truth she had buried for years began to claw its way back. Years ago, before Harrington Global's meteoric rise, she had been married briefly. Few people knew. She had ensured it was erased from her public narrative. The marriage had ended in shards after a miscarriage, a loss that gutted her more than she dared admit. She had thrown herself into work, forging armor from ambition. If she never slowed, she never had to feel. But Sophie's innocent mom had cracked something open she had welded shut. Ethan sensed it too. One evening, as they walked Sophie home from school together after Clara had happened to be in the area, he noticed Clara's gaze soften as Sophie chattered about her science project. He said nothing, but his chest tightened. He had spent years shouldering the weight of grief alone, building his life around Sophie's needs, never daring to imagine another presence filling the void his late wife had left. Yet here was this powerful, unreachable woman kneeling in the hallway, listening intently to Sophie explain the solar system as if it were a board presentation. For a fleeting moment it looked like family. Still, Clara was not a woman without walls. Over coffee one evening, when Ethan gently asked why Sophie's drawing had unsettled her, Clara's smile faltered. She confessed, haltingly, as though each word was a trespass, that she had once been pregnant, that she had lost the baby, and that since then she had convinced herself she wasn't meant for family. The words spilled out faster than she intended, and when she stopped, her eyes glittered with shame. Ethan didn't interrupt. He simply sat in the quiet, his presence solid, his hands resting calmly on the table as if to say, "I hear you. I see you." For Clara, the admission was terrifying, but also liberating. For Ethan, it deepened a respect already budding into something more. They were two people scarred differently, yet bound by the silent language of loss. Sophie, oblivious to the undercurrents, only saw that her father laughed more when Clara was around, that the heaviness in his shoulders seemed lighter. As days blurred into weeks, the closeness wove itself quietly into their routines. Clara would stop by Sophie's school performance, her applause genuine. Ethan would find small notes on his desk in Clara's handwriting. Good luck with Sophie's recital tonight. Neither dared name what was forming, but both felt it. A fragile, unexpected intimacy born from storm and confession. The fragile balance they had built was shattered the moment whispers began threading their way through the company halls. It started with a photograph snapped on a phone. Clara leaving Sophie's school auditorium, standing beside Ethan as Sophie hugged her tightly. The image was harmless to anyone with compassion, but inside Harrington Global it became fuel. The CEO and the janitor driver, employees muttered, their voices dripping with derision. Within days, the story spread across gossip sites. A powerful woman entangled with a man far beneath her rank. It was scandal that threatened to undo Clara's empire. In the boardroom, the temperature turned icy. Senior executives pressed Clara with veiled threats about reputation, investors, and stock price. She met their accusations with her usual steel, but inside she trembled. That evening, when Ethan walked her to her car and asked if she wanted to come by for dinner with Sophie, Clara's heart twisted. Fear spoke louder than longing. She pulled away, her tone clipped, distant. Whatever this is, it can't continue. I have my company to protect. My life is not built for this. The words felt like shards in her mouth, but she forced them out. Ethan's jaw tightened, his eyes dark with disappointment. Sophie, watching from the window, saw the retreat and felt it like abandonment. The little girl's trust cracked, her drawings torn from the walls that night in a fit of heartbreak. Clara tried to bury herself in work, but every headline cut deeper. CEO's secret affair with employee? Harrington dynasty crumbling? She had weathered market crashes and lawsuits, but never had she felt this vulnerable. Alone in her office at midnight, she replayed Sophie's voice calling her mom and Ethan's steady silence. The truth she was running from was not Ethan's status. It was her own fear of loss, fear of letting herself need anyone again. The breaking point came at a quarterly press conference. Cameras flashed, investors leaned forward, reporters sharpened questions like knives. Clara took the podium, papers in hand, and felt her throat tighten. She could have denied everything, painted Ethan as a loyal employee misrepresented by gossip. But when she looked out into the sea of cameras, she remembered Sophie's drawings, the grief she herself had hidden for years, and Ethan's unwavering gaze the night she confessed her loss. For the first time in her career, she abandoned the script. "Yes," she said into the stunned silence, her voice steady but softer than anyone had ever heard. "The man in those photographs is Ethan Miller. He works in this company, and he is also a single father raising a daughter who has taught me more about courage and love than any boardroom ever has. I did not intend for our lives to intertwine, but they did, and I will not diminish the truth of what I have found in him and in Sophie." The room erupted. Some voices jeered, others gasped, but Clara pressed on, her hands gripping the podium as though anchoring herself. "I know the narrative you expect, a powerful CEO tainted by scandal, but I have my own truth to share. Years ago, I lost a child. It broke something inside me, and I chose ambition over grief. But standing in that little apartment, seeing a wall of drawings from a girl who lost her mother, I realized how far I had run from my own humanity. Ethan and Sophie reminded me that family is not weakness. It is strength." The cameras caught everything. The shimmer in her eyes, the raw break in her voice. By the time she stepped away from the podium, the narrative had shifted. Headlines no longer spoke only of scandal. They spoke of vulnerability, of confession, of a CEO daring to humanize herself in a world that worshipped control. Investors murmured uneasily, but public sentiment swelled with empathy. The woman who had once been untouchable had shown she could bleed. Back in his apartment, Ethan watched the broadcast with Sophie curled against him. Her small hand clutched his sleeve when Clara's words reached them. "She told the truth, Daddy," Sophie whispered. For the first time in weeks, hope flickered in Ethan's chest. Clara had risked everything, not for power, not for control, but for them. The fallout from Clara's confession rippled for weeks. Executives threatened resignations. Stock prices dipped, and rival companies circled like vultures. Yet amid the storm, something else began to shift. Letters poured into Harrington Global from single parents, widows, and children who had watched her speech and recognized their own pain. For once, Clara Harrington wasn't being discussed in terms of profit margins or power plays. She was being spoken of as a woman who had dared to be vulnerable. And in the quiet that followed, Clara knew what she had to do. She didn't go to the boardroom first. She went to a small apartment on the east side of the city, the one with peeling paint and a wall of children's drawings. Sophie was the first to see her through the window, her crayons scattered across the table. The little girl ran to the door before Ethan could stop her, flinging it open with a cry of delight. Clara froze at the threshold, suddenly unsure. In her hands, she carried a large wooden frame, wrapped in brown paper. Ethan stood behind Sophie, his eyes guarded. Clara drew a breath and stepped inside. "I came to say I'm sorry," she began, her voice low. "To both of you. I let fear decide for me, and it cost me more than I ever imagined." She set the frame gently against the wall and unwrapped it. Inside was a large canvas backing, designed to hold dozens of Sophie's crayon drawings together. "I thought these belonged somewhere permanent," Clara said, her throat thick. Sophie's eyes widened with wonder. Then she darted forward and hugged Clara tightly, whispering a single word that undid them all. "Mommy?" Clara's arms closed around the girl as tears finally broke free. For years, she had buried her grief, convinced she was incapable of mothering again. Yet in that tiny voice, in that unguarded embrace, she felt something heal. Ethan watched, his chest tightening with a mix of awe and fear. He had lived so long protecting Sophie and himself from more loss. But in that moment, he realized the truth. They both needed Clara, just as she needed them. Later that evening, as the three of them shared a simple meal of pasta at Ethan's small kitchen table, laughter came easier than words. Clara helped Sophie hang the framed collage on the wall, her fingers lingering on each picture. Ethan finally broke the silence, his voice steady but low. "You've risked everything for us. I don't know why." Clara looked at him, eyes shimmering. "Because I couldn't keep living a life that looked perfect but felt empty. You and Sophie, you reminded me of what I lost, and what I still have a chance to build." In the weeks that followed, Clara made her choice clear. She launched a new initiative under Harrington Global called the Healing Families Foundation, dedicating millions to programs for children who had lost parents and for single mothers and fathers struggling to rebuild. Her investors balked at first, but public support surged, and soon what had seemed reckless became visionary. Ethan, still working his shifts, found himself part of the foundation's launch, standing quietly beside Clara and Sophie as cameras captured a different kind of empire, one built not on profits alone, but on compassion. Their personal lives shifted too. Clara traded her penthouse for a smaller, sunlit house closer to Ethan's neighborhood. It wasn't grand, but it was theirs. She spent evenings helping Sophie with homework, her laughter echoing through hallways that had once been filled only with silence. Ethan, once cautious to let anyone too close, found his defenses softening. When Sophie drew her next picture, she handed it proudly to him. 3 figures holding hands, no longer imagined, but real. One crisp autumn evening, the 3 sat around the dinner table, candles flickering, a pot of stew steaming between them. Clara glanced at Ethan, then at Sophie, who was chattering about her day. A smile spread slowly across Clara's face, one of quiet certainty. She raised her glass. "To family," she said simply. Ethan clinked his against hers, his eyes holding hers with something unspoken but undeniable. Sophie lifted her glass of milk and echoed, "To family." And in that modest home, beneath the glow of ordinary light, something extraordinary had taken root. They weren't the broken pieces they had once been. They were whole, together. For Clara, for Ethan, and for Sophie, the beginning of healing was no longer a wish whispered in the dark. It was here, in the warmth of laughter, in the courage of love, in the unshakable bond of family. And so, what began as one unexpected ride home became the journey that healed 3 broken hearts. Ethan, Clara, and little Sophie found that family isn't about wealth, titles, or perfection. It's about the courage to show our scars and the grace to love through them. Their laughter around a simple dinner table reminds us that even the smallest acts of kindness can change everything. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes in second chances. And don't forget to subscribe, so together we can keep telling the stories that remind us all. Love is the truest home we build.